Alright, so in this class, we have talked about energy in Vermont, Germany, but we haven't really thought about how the rest of the world, the developing world, may access or not access energy. And I know a lot of you guys did think about it and went and wrote about it this week. So kind of like a little change of pace is to think about that from a whole different perspective. And so we're lucky to have our guest tonight, Steve McCauley, from a college in Massachusetts, all the way up here via Megabus.
No, I drove.
All the way up here to give us his, some of the work. You're going to talk a bit about your work in South Africa.
Yeah, that's right.
But also this sort of bigger, these other ideas about how the rest of the world thinks about it, consumes, or even has access. So Steve will be with us right up until our break at 5:15. Write down your questions and thoughts, and let's give a big, warm energy alternative.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, y'all, for having me here. It's really a privilege to be here in Vermont. I've met so many bright people today who are working on really interesting things. So you are in a great spot for thinking about solutions. So that's wonderful. Thanks to Richard and to Jenny for inviting me here. It's an honor to be a part of this series, too. I know you've done some interesting things in this series. I'll just say, Richard, I did something similar with a class like this at Clark University, where I opened it up to the public and to practitioners and students. But I think I wasn't as brave enough to go all the way to really manifest this vision as you're doing. So bravo, and I'm taking notes on what you're doing. So thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about energy transitions in the developing world. Try to bring some of that perspective to the conversation, and I would love to hear your thoughts on these things too. Just a little bit about me first. That's not me. So I've done some work in a couple of different areas that speak to this problem, just a little bit of background. So a lot of my teaching work and also just I like to get my hands dirty. So I've been involved in a lot of sustainable community initiatives, from natural building to eco-city planning project in China to work that I do in Worcester. So I like to be involved with the practice around sustainable communities. I've worked particularly on community energy projects in the state of Massachusetts, looking at some policy things and some energy cooperatives and some other things like that. And then I'm involved a lot in project-based learning, and this is the work that I do with taking students out into communities in different parts around the world to work with grassroots organizations. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. This will come up in the talk today too. So I'm going to talk today from the perspective of informal settlements in Cape Town. So this is a really dramatic context. It's probably a lot different from other contexts in which you've thought about energy sustainability, and raises a lot of different kinds of questions and considerations. So just a little background about informal settlements in general. I've seen this estimate that there's close to 1 billion people, or maybe more than 1 billion people, living in informal settlements around the world. This seems like an astronomically high estimate to me. But there's a lot of megacities around the world that are seeing rapid urbanization, rapid rise of the urban population, and most of them are living in informal settlements like this. So it's a lot of people, 1 in 7 in the world. So we can keep that number in mind as we think about energy for these people. In Cape Town in particular, about 250,000 out of 1 million households live in informal settlement context. So about a quarter of the population in the city is living in informal settlements like this. They come from rural areas for job opportunities, access to whatever opportunities it is in the city that they're coming there. They get a foothold in some areas, and communities start to form there and can stay there for a long time. Usually in the most marginal areas, on steep slopes or floodplains, railway reserves or riverbanks, and they just get a foothold there and stay for a long time and become communities. They're very hard places. The label as being a land invader, an illegal land invader, renders them very vulnerable to being kicked out, though that's happening less now, but just there's a lot of vulnerabilities. Even when things seem stable just below the surface, there's always the potential for crime, violence, fire. It's very a hard, precarious situation. And at the same time, these communities really do become viable communities. There's economic activity, people have jobs, they commute outside the communities to their jobs or work in the communities. There's community, there's friendship, there's hope, there's bars, there's spaza shops, other things in the community. So they are real communities. One thing to mention about informal settlements is this is a relatively newer phenomenon in the last several decades. The system of apartheid, which ended in 1994 in South Africa, created a racialized, segregated landscape where non-whites were systematically disenfranchised and excluded from opportunities. It was after apartheid, with the opening up of the economy, that led to mechanization of agriculture, integration of rural economies into the global economy, rural job loss, the concentration of money and capital in cities that led people to flood into cities and create informal settlements around the former black townships and around other parts of the city. So this is a newer phenomenon in the last few decades, and I imagine it's the same thing that's happening in other megacities around the world in terms of the driving forces that are leading to the growth of these informal settlements. And of course, when we talk about energy sustainability in the context of the developing world or of informal settlements in particular, this is the real question that we're looking at, is the question of electricity access. At least you have to start by thinking about that question. So this graphic shows electricity access in the US and the UK reached about universal access by about 1950. There was another wave of electrification that brought all these people into electrification in the 1980s. As globalization brought these other countries and economies into the world economy and brought their rural populations into an electrified system. Here in the kind of greenish is South Africa, and here's India in purple, and you can see that they lag well below universal access to electricity. So this is huge numbers of people that are left out of pretty much the most basic form of modernity that we have, electricity. So as we think about a sustainable energy transition, this is an important piece to think about, is these people getting electricity. At the same time, of course, all of these people that already have electricity, we have to be transitioning away from fossil fuels. So this is such a massive transition that has to occur anyway. Let's hope we can address this issue of access in the same time. This is South Africa in the greenish, and India. So the South Africa, this has at about 75% electricity access. I've seen numbers more like 85% of access in South Africa. I don't know about India.
How do they count all those houses that you showed before? Are those connected, not connected?
Some are connected and some not. That community had some wires in it. So some of this is connected, but some people within this won't be connected. It's a very kind of piecemeal process a lot of times. And that's a big question we'll talk about, is getting access and the complexities around that. So a couple questions I'm going to raise today in this briefly. What is the meaning of energy transition in these contexts? And I'll speak about 4 brief kind of transition moments that we might think about in the context of informal settlements and energy. How can we support efforts to improve energy sustainability in these communities? So I'll talk about the approach that we take at WPI in terms of working with these communities to improve energy sustainability. And how does the energy situation in informal settlements relate to a broader pursuit of energy sustainability in South Africa or in the developing world or globally? So to think about the transition dynamics or energy sustainability in the communities, 4 kind of contexts or points that I'll speak to. So this is the situation of people without access to the electricity grid. This is off the grid Cape Town style or informal settlement style. And this is the main fuel they use is wood or charcoal. This is their main cooking technology. It's called a gurney, so it's basically a bucket. Here's a man's kind of feeding his fire in the bucket and heating up water. This is a main cooking technology. Lighting is often done by candles. They also use a fuel called paraffin for lighting or heating sometimes. So there's a mix of fuels that they use. I'll actually show you, this graphic shows in the kind of orangish color. This is the percentage of households, non-electrified households in orange, in South Africa that use different types of fuel in their shacks. So 76% are using candles, that's for lighting. 74% are using fuel wood, 68% are using paraffin, and then they're using a range of other kinds of fuels too. Here's gas, 9% are using solar power, coal, dry cell batteries, generators, and car batteries. So they're putting together a mix of different fuel types and technologies to meet basic energy needs for lighting, cooking, and heating. Some even use these gurneys for heating in the winter. They'll bring them in at night as the embers are burning to keep their shack warmer. So this kind of energy system comes with a lot of risks, as you can imagine and see. Indoor air quality is really bad, leads to a lot of health issues, and the risk of fire is very present. It's also a very windy place in Cape Town, so if you have any kind of accident with candles or these gurneys, fire is very present. We've had fires touch on about 4 communities that we've worked with in this area. And I'll show you, unfortunately, a picture of some of that later. So it's no surprise that getting access to electricity stands as the universal pursuit for these communities. It just makes a world of difference. It's clean, at least at the point of them consuming it at the household level. It's easy. It powers a wide range of appliances. It allows for income-generating activities. There are bars in the informal settlements that have refrigerators, spaza shops they call them. There are barber shops that have music going. There's carpenters. So it allows for a lot of economic activity. It also allows for entertainment, music, television, charging cell phones, and also, very important, it allows for greater security. Without electricity, you don't have all public lighting in these communities, and it's incredibly dangerous for people who have to go out to the bush to go to the bathroom at night. For women, there's constant threats of abuse and things. So having public lighting is a really, really important benefit. So it gets complex when communities do get electricity. Part of it is a constant negotiation about what kind of social services a community will get, because they don't have secure tenure rights. They don't have an actual legal right to be on that land, but there's so many people, and these communities are so big, and some of them have been there for a long time. The biggest informal settlement in Cape Town has 500,000 people. 500,000 people live in one huge informal settlement. So they're big communities, and so the state over time decides when they need services, how much, and it's just kind of a negotiated kind of thing. Sometimes they'll get paved roads, sometimes they'll get access to water, and sometimes they'll get electricity. And it's something the communities themselves are always pushing for and working for. A lot of times what happens when they do get electricity access, very quickly people learn how to take advantage of that resource. So one of the things that you see happen is called backyarders. That means when somebody who has a shack, somebody will also build a new shack in their backyard and start drawing off the same resources. So they'll splice their wires and start getting electricity from their same electricity box. Some of them even grow into little micro utilities where they might splice their wires and share electricity with 2 families nearby them, or with 4 families or 8 families, and create almost a little micro utility that's generating income for themselves by splicing off wires and running it from the electricity box in their little shack. So it becomes very complicated very quickly. This map also shows a story about the broader community. So electricity was provided to these parts of the community in the blue and the green. And immediately a lot of other people came to that community. So other shacks filled in around this part of the community. Well, then the landed class around here, which happens to be a vineyard area, a very beautiful area of vineyards, these vineyard owners started protesting to the municipality that the expansion of the community represented a kind of unacceptable level of degradation of their view shed into this area, and lowers their property values and things like that. So the municipality agreed to strictly limit the extension of any more public services above this line. So this part of the community doesn't have electricity, doesn't have running water, doesn't have paved roads, and so they do what they can to draw from resources here. They go down here to get some water for washing and things. There's some bathroom facilities down here. And I'm sure some of them are drawing electricity from wires from long extension cords and things like that. So it's a complicated process that you almost get a sense like with every advance, there's like 2 steps back in a way too, because there's so much poverty and so much need in that context, it's hard to really upgrade the communities. I'll show you this picture here. It's a little dramatic. This is a picture of a fire that hit in this area just about 2 weeks after we left. We've been working on a facility that was down in this area. Just 2 weeks after we left, this fire ripped through and burned a lot of this area. And if you see, you can look down. Here are some electricity poles. So this is the lower part of the community that has electricity. And this fire occurred up in this part that didn't have electricity, probably from candles or something like that. And it's just way too common. So it's a risky situation for them. And even when they do have electricity, there's a lot of risk involved with it. Electrocution and splicing wires, and the kind of they call it slum governance, the kind of rules that they go by in terms of who gets access to electricity, who can be hired to come in and fix the electricity when it breaks, because there's such a strong need in the community. Any opportunity for a job is kind of jealously guarded and things like that. So it's just very difficult to make substantial upgrades in this kind of context. So it leaves us with the question of, as a kind of final moment in the thinking about transition potential in these communities, is do these efforts to upgrade communities really result in substantial improvements for the people who live there, or is the poverty and the hardship just so great that these efforts just kind of backslide? And it's really hard, and it's a real question we ask. Or are there opportunities to build on and really get traction and try to make incremental improvements in the communities? And there is a lot of effort to do that. So I'll just show you a couple of the kind of things that folks are doing to try to add on to the electricity access and to try to do something that's going to last there. This is a small, really low-cost project called the Leader of Light. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's teaching people how to put recyclable plastic bottles into the roofs of their shacks to just add to the lighting inside the shack and improve their quality of life in the shack. So that's a really easy one. The iShack is a program that trains franchisees in communities, so it gives them a little business to generate solar-powered electricity and then to have clients in the community that pay a monthly fee to come and draw from that solar-generated power to charge cell phones, to power TVs, radios. I don't know if they distribute batteries or just run wires, but the idea is that they franchise solar-powered electricity to people in the community. This was a group that we worked with in Cape Town called Touching the Earth Lightly. They focus on people-centered sustainable design in the informal settlements. So they do a lot of sustainable building projects, bioremediation kind of projects, some energy things, and they're building things in the communities and working with folks, teaching them skills, training them to be foremen on the projects. So there's a lot of folks doing good work in the communities and trying to get traction on something that will take hold and really help the communities.
Steve, how does that first one on the left work?
It's just like a plastic 2-liter bottle with the label taken off and the bottom taken off and just kind of implanted into the roof, and it just allows light through. So just that simple.
It's actually not a bulb or anything.
No, that's just all passive. It's just the way the light kind of concentrates there. Okay, so maybe this is a good chance to tell you about the work that we're doing at WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Probably a lot of you have heard of WPI. So that's where I teach, and I'm working in a particular program called Interdisciplinary and Global Studies, and we administer the IQP project. I'll tell you about that. We have about 40 project centers around the world, including in our city of Worcester. And students go to these project centers to do their interactive qualifying project. So the idea, this is a project that all students do in their junior year, and it's a science and engineering school, so the large majority of students there are engineering or science students. The idea is, with the IQP, is to get them out into communities, and they work in teams, usually teams of 4, and have a sponsoring organization in the community. In whatever community is around the world, they have the sponsor who they work with on a project. And the idea is that it gets the engineering students out into the world to do a project that's going to really make a difference and help an organization move forward their goals, and at the same time to really think deeply about the social context and to think about the social implications of the work that they do as engineers. So it's a really important program, I think, for opening up their minds to what's happening in the world. Last year, 852 students went during some term during the year to one of these project centers, so that was about 80% of students. So most students there now are going out to these project centers. The Cape Town Project Center was started and is run by my co-author on this project and my colleague and friend Scott Justo, who Jenny knows too. He has done an amazing job of setting up a project center in Cape Town that allows us to go there every year for 8 weeks with students to work in this community context. So it has this particular informal settlement kind of focus in Cape Town. I'll tell you about one project that we worked on in the informal settlements with the students that was kind of in the energy space, so you can get a sense of how we're trying to work on energy sustainability in the informal settlements. So the goal of this team was to work with the City of Cape Town's Office of Sustainable Livelihoods. So they had like several thousand of these wonder bags, which are insulated bags that facilitate cooking without any fuel. So you put the thing in there after you've cooked it a little bit, and it continues cooking it in this insulated bag. So the team was going to work with the city to distribute these wonder bags through the communities. But what they wanted to do, the city wanted to do, is use that as a seed to start small entrepreneurial businesses in the communities where someone could have a business of actually selling these wonder bags, so they could become an energy entrepreneur that would sell energy products and services in the community, creating a livelihood opportunity for those entrepreneurs and distributing sustainable energy products in the community. So that was the goal, is to distribute these things. When our students got there, they found out that there actually were no entrepreneurs yet, that there weren't entrepreneurs yet. So what they did is they first had to design a business model for how this could work, how they could distribute Wonder Bags in the communities and how it might work as a business. And then they reached out to try to find potential entrepreneurs who might be interested, who they could bring into this project and partner with and see if they could get something going. So what they came up with was the idea of selling the Wonder Bags, distributing them in creches. Creches are preschools, basically, and they realized that creches have a lot of reasons that they would be a good energy entrepreneur. They're centrally located in the communities. They're already established businesses because people pay a little bit to come to the preschools, so they know how to handle money in this kind of unsafe environment. They know how to deal with it and things like that, so they're already established business. The market of people who come, the guardians who come every day to pick up the kids, who often are women, are also the major decision makers in the household, so they might be interested in cooking technologies. So there was a lot of reasons why creches made sense as the energy entrepreneurs. So they actually reached out and started pilot projects with a couple different creches who took some Wonder Bags and sold them. And the results were pretty good. They sold all of the Wonder Bags that they got. They seemed to think it was a promising idea. We're not sure how it'll go. The economic margins were very tight with selling the Wonder Bags for a profit. But anyway, it was an interesting project, a successful project. They learned a lot about how energy works in these communities and how entrepreneurship works in these communities. And a lot of our projects actually don't go that well, and there's a lot of challenges with working in these environments, but this one went pretty well. So just a couple lessons that we've learned about doing this kind of community development work around energy and other topics in the informal settlements. One is the importance of supply chains, of just getting products, initial products and products, materials for maintenance into the communities. It's just really difficult to get to the communities. People don't generally come there. It's difficult to get access to there. It's difficult for people from the community to have transportation to get out. It's really difficult to set up these supply chains. And knowledge networks as well. Of course, it's really important for people in the community to get some education and some training and just learn about different ideas and to see what folks are doing in other communities that might work for their community. So to try to make those linkages between efforts that are going on in other communities that might work and that kind of thing. And not to mention with us and the kind of ideas that we can bring and the way that we can set up partnerships of learning within the community. So that's really important. Another important piece is robust collaborative processes. We only go into the communities for about 8 weeks, and we do that once a year, and then we go back, and then we come back the next year for 8 weeks again. And so in order to have continuity, it's really important to set up robust collaboration. So here are some of our NGO partners. This is Adi. He works for one of our NGOs in Cape Town called the Center for Community Resources. This is Terrence. He is a former gang member, and he spends his evenings working on anti-gang violence. And during the day, he works for an NGO called Shack Dwellers International. And that's a group that are people from the informal settlements who have an NGO that does community development and building within the communities. So we have a lot of NGO partners, and Scott, the project center director, does a good job of maintaining contact with them throughout the year so that we have some continuity in the projects that we do. And the last piece is commitment to experimentation and collective learning. So that's what we do in these projects, is we actually try to implement something. We're always aiming for implementation. Even if it's just making recommendations about some things, we try to take it to the next level, saying, well, how specifically would this recommendation play out? What would the challenges be? What would the most effective way to implement it be? Can we reach out and find some partners who might want to work on that implementation? So we always aim to really implement something for experimentation. And we're always learning from it. When it doesn't go well, when we screw up, when some idea doesn't work well, or when it does, we're constantly using that kind of action learning approach. So let me step back and then look a little bit briefly at the broader context in which these informal settlements happen, in which energy sustainability can happen in South Africa. So one important point to make is that South Africa has very progressive pro-poor policies to help poor people. When the ANC took power in 1994, they made a commitment to provide everybody in the country with a house and with services like electricity. So there are very strong pro-poor policies throughout the national government. It's been really hard for them to meet even the growing demands every year as new people come into the city. So they've recently adopted a strategy called informal settlement upgrading, which is the idea that we can't just move these people out of these settlements and create all new houses for them. So it's better to incrementally upgrade the communities in situ, so to provide them electricity and better housing and things like that. So it's a popular and a pretty effective program, it seems, so far. Renewables only account for a very minuscule percentage of electricity generation in South Africa, 0.1%. And this is in a country that has tremendous wind potential, tremendous solar capacity, and there's just no commitment to building a renewables-based energy production system in South Africa.
Do you know offhand what the other sources are?
Mostly coal, very high percentage coal. South Africa is a coal place. That was just what I was going to speak to. I don't know what the other percentages are. I think about 10% is biomass, crude, simple kind of biomass fuels. 87% overall is from fossil fuels. So I think a large part of that is coal. They're exploring natural gas there too, South Africa. So a lot of the kind of failure to mobilize any movement toward renewables, I think it has to do with Eskom. It's a national utility that's kind of grown up and evolved in a kind of coal-rich environment, and so they're a very coal-oriented institution. Their creativity, their institutions, everything is oriented around protecting the coal interests, so they just haven't been able to open up to the possibility of transition to different fuel types. This was a picture of a coal silo that collapsed actually when I was there and led to a blackout of a day without electricity. They have rolling blackouts in South Africa now. Some people see electricity access as being less stable now than it was under apartheid, which is just a kind of reference point, but it's to say that it's kind of a crumbling infrastructure, it's kind of a crumbling institution. There are conversations about nuclear power that come up from time to time in South Africa. Yeah.
Wouldn't there be, like, to compare those two things, how it might be worse now, wouldn't you consider the fact that they might have not measured the black communities before?
Yeah, could have. It could have, yeah. Sorry, there was a question as the comparison of electricity access now and electricity sort of reliability now compared to apartheid years. Wouldn't comparing that be a little inaccurate because they probably didn't even measure accurately the black communities under apartheid, and that's definitely true. And I don't want to be flippant about making that comparison. What made me think of that, and I took the quote off of here, but I had a quote on here from somebody, a black South African from the informal settlements, who said, why are we having these rolling blackouts now when it used to be better under apartheid? So it's something that people experience. Apartheid was a planned economy. It was more like a socialist economy. It was severely racist, but it was a planned economy. Now it's an open neoliberal economy where a lot of people are on the, find things worse, actually. If black people comment about how the trains were much better then, but I'm sure they'd rather have it the way it is now, but it's a precarious existence. Yeah, that would have been nice. Okay, so that's where South Africa is. Some broader lessons and questions that have come out of my work in this context and some other places that I've worked. What is the import of sustainability discourses in these communities? Does it make sense to talk about sustainability and transitioning to sustainability in these contexts? Well, probably if we think about sustainability as kind of greening goals, and I think here we often adopt a discourse of more like technical solutions, if we can get this technology implemented. Those discourses are probably ill-suited for this context just because there's such dire need for basics. But the discourses that we have around sustainable energy and sustainable communities here in the US are not that narrow, actually. We have a broader discourse that talks about sustainable energy in the context of creating local jobs, of developing energy autonomy and energy independence. And those are things that very much are fitting for the informal settlements, because that's what people want there too, is some autonomy, independence, local jobs. And I think some of the strategies that we use to pursue sustainability in communities at community levels in the Northeast US and other places could be appropriate in informal settlements. Here's another question. What new geographies are being created by energy transition? And maybe some of you all started to touch on some of these themes when you were looking at different countries around the world. As a lot of countries try to transition away from fossil fuels, what kind of geographies does that leave us with in terms of spatial patterns, of resources, access to fuels, electricity, and in terms of the scale at which these economic activity and social activity take. So it's a major transformation in energy system. It has social and economic implications around that. What does that geography look like? Maybe I'll just skip ahead really quickly here. This is the last slide to show. I just came back from working with students in Morocco. That was the last project center I went to. And we had one project that looked at energy policy, and it turns out it's a very different context there in Morocco. They had been dependent on imports for 96% of their fuel. And that felt very insecure to them, very energy insecure. So they made a goal of producing 42% of their power from domestic renewable sources by 2020. So that's a pretty aggressive target, and they're going to meet that target, actually. This is the development of the Ouarzazate solar facility, which is a 500 megawatt solar facility. There's going to be 4 other facilities like this in the country. They have about 2,000 megawatts from wind and about the same amount from hydro as well. So very aggressive pursuit of renewable-based energy system and also a renewables-based economy, because they're actually adopting a kind of green energy cluster approach to developing solar facilities where they're training engineers. They're using that as an economic generator for growth in the region and really trying to become, well, this was an article from The Guardian just about a month ago. Maybe some of you saw this. Morocco is poised to become a solar superpower. Actually, a lot of the power they're producing is already committed to Europe because European countries need to meet their green goals, and they're the ones who've provided funding to build this facility. So a lot of the power is actually going to go to Europe, but the fact is that they're building a renewable-based energy system and renewable-based economy. So that's a very different approach than what South Africa is taking. So just a couple last points to end on. Building sustainable supply and knowledge chains is really important for the work we do in the communities and informal settlements, as I talked about. But I think in general, as a way of thinking about building sustainable local economies, this is a useful way to think about it. How can we get in touch with people who provide different services, put them together in supply chains? How can we share knowledge with people who are experimenting with different kinds of approaches? So I think that is a useful approach anywhere. And just maybe a last comment I'll make. I've been doing this work at WPI now for, I guess this is my 3rd year, but just my 2nd year of really intense work traveling with students. So I went to South Africa last year. This year I just came back from Morocco, and I'll be going to India in the spring. And then next year I have DC for 2 months, and then Melbourne, Australia for 2 months later. So it's really exciting, obviously, and really rewarding work to get to go to other places and work with them and work with students in those contexts. And it's super important for learning. But it's funny because I find myself holding 2 different discourses together at the same time. One, the discourse at WPI is all about globalizing. They want to be the global polytechnic. They want all of their students to go away. And I think that's wonderful. In other circles that I operate, it's more about localizing, reducing carbon footprints, building local economies, doing things, to build an economy. So I'm kind of holding these 2 different discourses in a little bit of tension as I do all this traveling to other places. So I just wanted to comment on that. So that's what I had for today. Thank you. And
Questions, comments, or observations about any of this, or about what you guys thought about from this week? Yeah, Joel.
No, I'm just curious, like, what you majored in college.
Geography. Yeah. Actually, no, I majored in economics and philosophy when I was an undergraduate. I went to a liberal arts school that didn't have that many options of actually practical majors, so I studied economics and philosophy. I did geography for graduate school.
And then I'm also just curious, like, I just read a paper on SEI, Solar Energy Initiative. It's like a very similar program to you. And they were explaining how they train people in the local area, and then they leave. So how do you keep these structured projects to, how do you work with maintenance and all that once you leave?
Yeah, it's a great question. SEI, I'm not familiar with it. It's not SIT, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because they're
just
based
another
up
nonprofit.
Gotcha. So yeah, that's a really good question, and we've started to think a lot more about that, about trying to understand the impacts that we're having on communities, and how to maintain that continuity. When we use the term sustainability with our students, when we're preparing to do this work and when we're doing this work, we usually use sustainability in a sense of how can we do things that are going to be lasting for those communities. Yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, especially in the informal settlements. I mean, it's like, I didn't talk too much about the theft and vandalism that's just so present there. Yeah, it's just so present. I mean, even when we're building something, you keep your backpack on your back, you're watching your tools as you're doing things. I mean, things can walk off so quickly. So it's challenging. So it's hard. That's why we try to build these collaborative networks where we have NGOs who work there regularly and who are based in the community. So they own the projects more than we do. So it's really their projects that they're keeping going. And we try to come in and help. We rarely do a project where we just kind of drop in and do something. In fact, we never do. We always have community co-researchers or co-practitioners. But it's a challenge. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Every year that you go back somewhere, do you work on the same project, or is it a different project every year?
Yeah. Pretty often different. There's actually 6 different projects we would work with. So when we went to Cape Town this year, we had 2 projects in that one particular community where the fire was, I showed you. We had 1 project in another informal settlement, and then we had 3 projects that were more just in the regular city. A lot of times they're new. Every year, most of them are new, but a lot of times, some, maybe 2 or 3 might build on a project from a previous year. Maybe I'll show you. No, they come from, that's the role of the project center director. So my friend Scott, who's the project center director for Cape Town, he'll go over every year in the summer and set up the projects, work with partners, figure out what they're working on, what could we plug in with. This project that we were working on, you can see these shacks are actually a little nicer. These are upgraded shacks. And the people actually, here is, you can see, it's a little bit of running water that they get. And actually each shack also gets a toilet. They call it 1 for 1, 1 toilet for 1 shack, which is pretty amazing in this context. So this was a community that had this reblocking effort done, where it was a really difficult community. And a lot of partners came together to do this reblocking effort, where they basically move the shacks and build better shacks, and also widen the roads to allow access for emergency vehicles, because that's a big issue, provide water and sewage in the community. So this whole idea of informal settlement upgrading. And reblocking is a particular way of basically like literally taking down some shacks, rebuilding them with streets. And so we had a project one year that kind of designed the reblocking plan with some other partners. So they laid out the plan. When we came back the following year, they had rebuilt most of the shacks. It took about 4 months to do the reblocking. And they had saved one big open space, which was for our students to work with other partners to build a preschool, a creche. So that was our project for the following year, was to implement the creche. So that was a cool project. And that was one that had continuity. I think they're actually back in that same community right now, actually doing something else. Yeah.
How does one make a living doing something like this? It seems like it would be really hard to make a living doing something like this, even though it's so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it depends who you're talking about. Like our partners who live in the informal settlements.
I'm talking about like coming in from the United States or
Yeah.
wherever and going to a more impoverished place.
Yeah. 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 Let me just speak to all of the players in it. So there's people who live in the informal settlements. That's our partners who live and work there. Some of them have jobs, like within NGOs. Like some of the NGOs we work with, the people we work with live in the informal settlements, and they continue to work there. People stay in the informal settlements because they've lived there all their lives. So some of them have jobs outside the community. Others piece together jobs, like when we're building that Touching the Earth Lightly group we worked with. When they hire people from the community, they might hire them at an ad hoc basis. Or when we built a preschool, that was sort of hiring people for 7 days. And so people kind of earn a little bit that way, but it's kind of irregular employment. If you're talking about other educated South Africans who are working with NGOs and trying to go into communities, yeah, they just do that kind of work. It's like the nonprofit world, NGO world, where they're not making a lot of money. They're mostly getting grants or getting contracts. So they'll build something in an informal settlement. They might get a contract from, who knows, even there are sometimes like World Bank projects will flow through there. Habitat for Humanity International has some funding that'll go through. So they get a contract that lasts for a couple months to do something, but they're not making a lot of money. For us coming in, obviously we're lucky to have the kind of institutional backing of a university. So that's a kind of comfortable life here, and then we go and try to help. But that's not a mistake. We're taking more out of this process than they are because we're learning so much. We're getting this experience, and so there's a lot of privilege in that. I don't know if that answered your question, but. Yeah. That's a good question. The billion people in informal settlement. That's a really good question. That did sort of run across my mind as I was just trying to imagine, where do these billion people live in informal settlements?
Is it so then the numbers drastically increase, or
Yeah.
further throughout the
Yeah,
communities?
it's a really good question. I'd like to look into that particular number more myself and find out where and just kind of understand that. But I wouldn't be surprised if refugee camps are included in that number. I hope so, because if not, it's even more. But refugee camps are even more invisible in a lot of ways than informal settlements. Yeah.
You mentioned there's a lot of variety in the use of renewable energy in developing nations. Which form do you think is the most viable to pursue in these nations?
Of renewable energy or?
Yeah, and renewables.
Yeah, so this was the mix of fuels that people are using. This is in non-electrified houses, so they use a bunch of different things. This is even with households that have electricity, they still are using candles quite a lot and fuel because they're poor and they're trying to save money on electricity, so they use other things. But in terms of the mix, it depends where. Solar is probably best in these communities because there are initiatives like the iShack to get some PV panels in the communities. I got to think that like theft and vandalism is a major concern about that. But I have seen one community that had solar hot water on pretty much every rooftop. That seemed to be a successful program. So I would say solar hot water is probably viable in the communities. Solar PV to some extent. Wind, obviously, that's going to be a kind of a bigger scale thing that's going to be more at a regional scale. But in terms of what's viable anywhere in the developing world, it's all going to depend on resources. Morocco has solar and wind and hydro. Then again, so does South Africa. So, then it comes to the history and the institutions and can they transition. I'd be curious to hear from some of y'all what you found in terms of different fuels or renewable technologies that are viable in different parts of the world. Yeah.
I just had a question regarding China's really heavy investment on concerts in Africa. I'm just curious if you're seeing in your work the repercussions or sort of benefits of their involvement there.
That's a good question. I don't know a lot about it, but when I was in China, a lot of people were studying French so they can go and work in Africa. A lot of people see that as a place where things are happening. There is a lot of investment there. Did I see much impacts there? Not in South Africa. No, I can't say I saw much myself. I did work in China once on an eco-city project, and so that was a good window into China's strategy for achieving energy sustainability, which is to build new cities that have more energy efficient systems. So I'm interested in that too. Yeah.
Internationally, how is the language barrier being affected?
Yeah, it's a good question. Here in South Africa, most people spoke a little bit of English, enough that we could work with them. They mostly spoke Xhosa, which is the language that they spoke. Yeah, it's sometimes a barrier, but it was worse in Morocco because we had teams that nobody spoke any French and they only spoke French or Arabic. They didn't speak any English, so that was just really difficult. We had to hire some translators for some important meetings, and it really held back those couple projects, actually. But other projects in Morocco, the sponsors spoke enough English that we could work well together. So, yeah.
Do you get a sense that these communities are aspiring to have Western-style power and systems, or are they aware of this leapfrogging and trying to jump up ahead of
Cool. In these communities, in informal settlements.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I would say they want access to electricity. They don't. We encountered some resistance to the idea of sort of stopgap technologies like the Wonder Bag or like the Leader of Light. They don't want intermediary technologies for poor people. They want access to modern appliances and electricity. That being said, they want to improve their lives in whatever way they can. So that's a trade-off. Do they aspire to they definitely aspire to universal access and a modern grid system. Do they want to be off the grid? Not necessarily. I didn't hear any kind of that being a goal. Are there other parts of our system that you're wondering about particularly?
I just heard in, say, China, Chinese want to be like America, and they want the lifestyle that we have here. But like in this room, we're talking about how we move away from that lifestyle to be more resource efficient and sustainable.
Right.
And a trick, I think, in the global perspective is trying to get the folks who don't have the Western lifestyle to want something ahead of the Western lifestyle that is more sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think when your priority is heating your home and doing all that, I don't know if they want a suburban plot with 2
Right.
cars or.
I think they do in general, from what I've seen. Consumption is huge. Mass consumption is huge. I think people do want that. They want to leapfrog to cleaner forms, maybe. Like the Chinese eco-cities are all about leapfrogging beyond sort of coal-powered, oil-powered cities. But they want mass consumption. They want high levels of consumption, I think. They want cars. That's what I see there. Yeah. Yeah.
What form of entitlement to the property? Are they squatters or renters, or what rights do they have to?
Yeah, they're pretty much squatters. What land they're squatting on could be anything from private land, which is probably going to be more precarious, to municipal land that's just not being used. Usually it's municipal land that's not being used, maybe really steep slopes, like the one community with the fire was on a really steep slope. Sometimes just kind of wooded areas on the side of roads, so usually like municipal areas.
A disincentive to improve property when you can be thrown off at any time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a disincentive to improve properties. Yeah, and they can be thrown off at any time. That happens less. It used to happen a lot more, where they would just come in and bulldoze and just raise the communities. So that's like the ultimate form of insecurity about your house. So that doesn't happen as much at all anymore. Now it's more about upgrading the communities that are there. Sometimes they'll move a community and try to consolidate. So this community here was comprised of a number of different budding communities that they actually brought all together and put into one community. But yeah, it's very precarious.
Percentage of cell phone penetration.
Of cell phone penetration?
Yeah.
It was 100% from what I saw of adults. Yeah. Yeah, even in the informal settlements. I don't even know how they always charge it. They have Facebook. Every adult has a cell phone. Yeah.
Do you ever encounter like philanthropic work there, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Fund or the Rockefeller Foundation?
Yeah, definitely.
Repeat that statement.
Do you encounter philanthropic activity there, like the Gates Foundation or others? Yeah, definitely. That's a big part of some of the efforts to go on there. So there's the municipality, the municipal government, there's local NGOs, and then there's international organizations of different types. So I ran into Habitat for Humanity, Partners in Health is another one. I didn't see any Gates Foundation, but yeah, that stuff is around. And filters in there. Sometimes they just pass through. Sometimes they build things with a bit more longevity.
Is it more about the buildings and the healthcare and less about the energy?
For a long time, it was more about housing. Everyone was interested in housing, building shacks for people, building houses for people. I think now there's a shift that we're trying to be a part of, which is to say communities are more than just houses. So if you're going to do a informal settlement upgrading or reblocking, you got to leave room for a preschool. You got to leave room for playgrounds. You got to leave room for community spaces. So I think it had been all about providing houses. Now it's about creating communities. Yeah.
We had already talked about this, but what is the process of finding these places and judging whether or not they actually want your help and intervention?
Yeah, that's a good question. Finding the places is all about my friend Scott, the project center director. So he goes over there and he just kind of networks. He has friends, contacts, they build on. Now he's been working there for about 8 or 10 years. So they have relationships that they always build on. So at this point, it's more of a job of going over and talking to our existing partners of what's going on in any particular communities, anything that we could viably help with. And that includes partners who live in the communities and folks that we know. But do they want us? Sometimes the question that comes down to is when we arrive, because we get an idea about a project maybe 4 months before we go, and we prepare the students. But then the question is when we get there, what do we really want to do? Is the idea that we've been developing, does it make sense for them? And sometimes not. So we have a case where the community says, no, that's not what we want to do at all. And we've had cases where we actually had to leave a community entirely about 2 weeks in because it just wasn't working. And there was a lot of resistance. Sometimes these communities are really fraught, and sometimes we might have a good relationship and partnership with some people who want us to be doing something, but whatever that action is might actually not be welcomed by others, and so there's sometimes tensions. So yeah, it's especially tough in Cape Town because it's working in the informal settlements. Usually we try to get partners with a little more stability, but.
Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah,
you mentioned that in Morocco, there was some big solar, but it was being sold to Europe. So is that just a money-making deal for somebody?
I think it's what allowed them to piece together the funding to do that facility. So they got funding from USAID, World Bank, German Development Bank. They got a lot of funding from big banks and funders that have an interest in Europe meeting their greening goals of 20%. So what will happen in long term, I don't know. I remember asking them if these new solar facilities would lower the price of energy, of electricity for people in Morocco, and they said no. So they don't even have it as a goal to better serve their own people. But I don't know, it's a step, even though I'm not sure I agree with all of the politics of it. Yeah. We'll go to the back and then the front. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had pushback on some of the projects in Cape Town.
What was the first part?
You mentioned that there was pushback from the local community on some of the projects. Were there certain projects that created more pushback, or?
Yeah, there was a project that I'm thinking of that had to do with helping some folks in the community develop a savings group. A savings group is it's kind of an innovation that's come up in a lot of informal settlements where people will every month put a little money forward into this, create a savings together. And then over time, some of them can draw small loans from that savings group to do some initiatives, or sometimes they put the money in just so they can all celebrate New Year's with some big event or something like that. So there's a lot of different models for how to do it. We thought a savings group was the right model for this one project we were trying to do in one of the communities there. So we started to try to develop the savings group, and it was like the second year of developing it, it just wasn't going anywhere. And finally we realized that nobody in that community wants anything to do with managing people's money because it's so risky. They didn't want to be the ones holding the money. And so it was a real block in terms of moving forward with that kind of project. So.
Are they pretty receptive over renewable energy and helping them get power?
About renewable energy, power, yeah, sure, definitely. I think they'd be all for getting power. Depending on what type it is, they would probably love to have PV panels, but there would be security issues around that. The Wonder Bags actually seem to be really popular. People seem to really like the Wonder Bags. I was kind of surprised, personally. I thought they were going to see like a gimmick or something, but they seem to really like it. So, but I've heard that they are kind of resistant to products that are like small gimmicky type things for poor people. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think that, how do you see the warming impacting the community development? Especially since water access is so problematic, so just like the infrastructure change. And like especially if they transition to a renewable economy for some reason, probably it wasn't a trade-off, but just like I feel like that's like the worst.
Yeah, but that was the rage in the 90s. So, and it allows people in power to increase their power. Yeah. So the question was, how does climate change?
How does climate change and ecological development adaptation is kind of just like only like type of development that's going to be able to maintain itself during climate change? How do you see that going in that direction?
Right. So how's climate change playing out? How does that affect this story and what's going on around that? So one thing, in the communities, they are aware of climate change and they're concerned about it, and they realize that they have to adapt to it and build resilience to it. So that's kind of more the discourse in the communities, whether they can do a lot about it themselves or not. In terms of folks working at the kind of NGO level, development and stuff like that, they have fully adopted climate adaptation as the organizing principle, particularly around community development in these kinds of communities. So even the World Bank, for example, all of their development funds are now called climate adaptation funds. So even at the highest levels of international development, climate adaptation is the new paradigm. So there's a lot of attention about it. There's a lot of conferences about adaptation and stuff like that. So there is a lot of talk about it. I don't know how it plays out for those communities, except to realize that those communities usually are in the most marginal lands. I think I saw something just the other day that 70% of informal settlements in South Africa are in floodplains. So they're just the most precarious people living in the most precarious environments. So depending what kind of impacts climate change leads to, it can probably exacerbate problems. It gets really hot in the shacks in the summer and really cold in the shacks in the winter. Insulation is a huge step to take, and there's a lot of work around insulation, shack insulation.
So, we're going to stop here shortly, but just on this big picture, did you, I don't know if you or Jenny know, but some large portion of the world has no access. You showed the South Africa, which was like 30 or 40%, no access to electricity.
Yeah, I think the number's more like 15% now have no access.
But are there other places in Africa where those numbers might be higher?
I don't know about the numbers in a kind of disaggregated sense. That number for South Africa is...
The point I'm trying to make, not to put Steve on the spot, and maybe Jenny knows this. Okay, go ahead. So you're showing it here.
Well, I was just going to say that this is a national number. Right. So, here is 25. I've heard more like 15% within the country don't have access. If you're talking about the informal settlements, it's probably 50% or more don't have access to electricity.
So there's this issue that just a large portion of the world doesn't have access to. And then there's a whole large portion of the world, the U.S. stands alone probably or high, where we use way more energy than we possibly need. I think when we were at that conference, sustainability conference, they were talking about, on average, we use 4 times more energy than twice more than someone in Europe, and somebody in Europe, obviously way more than.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just one stat I heard recently is that one cross-country flight in the U.S. is equivalent to average driving for 2 years in terms of carbon footprint. So that's a lot, because I fly a lot for work, so it's a lot. And these people in these communities, their power, their energy that they use is like a candle, a couple pieces of wood that they burn. That's the kind of energy that they're using. Yeah.
Did any of you guys write about, just throw out something you might have written about, a place where some of these solutions are lower technology, some of these solutions are different than things we've talked about? Any creative things that you have seen out there? James, Eli, Sarah? Go ahead.
Yes, okay. So my paper this week was about a company called Husk Power Systems in India, and their business model is they're a for-profit company, but they have utilized discarded rice husks in really prominent rice-producing states in India as a form of creating biomass energy for small villages, and they've actually been super successful using that because they have this abundant natural resource that just essentially disintegrates anyway, or is used for animal feed, and it's really improved the development of communities, because businesses have been able to open for cheaper, because a lot of their fuel is kerosene, and it's way more expensive to use that fuel source than to actually source this energy. And they also, all of it, there's 350 people working for them, 300 of them are people who live in those communities, so it's also been a human capital development as well. So I thought it was an interesting model.
Corn husks.
Yeah, it's great.
No, rice.
Rice husks.
Rice husks.
Yeah. No, that sounds...
Ignorant guy from Vermont I am. We don't have rice husks in Vermont.
That sounds cool. And one thing I'll mention too is this context I showed you about the informal settlements, that's like the poorest of the poor that you can imagine. So whatever efforts are going on there to do things around sustainable energy, in other parts of the world, even if they have incrementally more access to resources, there's a lot of exciting things going on, I think, around micro hydro, biomass stuff, waste to energy. You asked a question earlier in the back about which renewable fuels might be best in developing world context. Maybe waste to energy and biomass stuff is some of the most promising ones in contexts like that.
Jenny, anything you want to add from your energy transitions research?
I think the international context is just so important, and so it's really great that Steve was able to share this additional piece with us, because it's been a very kind of North America, Europe-centric discussion so far, so it's really important.
Cool,
Thank
great.
you. Yeah.
One thing I'll mention, Jenny and I did some work in Worcester on the idea of a green energy cluster, which is the idea of like generating jobs and investment and economic activity around green energy technologies. And so it's a generative economic growth at the same time it's transforming the energy system. So we looked at those issues in Worcester. That same paradigm is really prevalent around the world. So in Morocco, is that same paradigm that's leading to this huge investment in solar facilities there. The Chinese eco-cities is the same thing. It's about bringing high value-added knowledge, engineering knowledge, and that kind of thinking to the question of energy solutions. Masdar City in the UAE, if you haven't heard of that, check it out. It's a huge like solar city that's very high-tech, and it's all about bringing international research partnerships around this innovation. So there's a lot of things happening in different parts of the world around, depending on how much money places have.
I guess I would just add one other thing. Steve and I and our friend Scott, who's the Project Center Director at Cape Town, also wrote a paper about shared action learning, which is the whole idea of learning by action, through action, right? And not necessarily coming into a community and having an answer for them, but working with them to think about how can we maybe contribute something helpful here, but also mutual learning, right? And that's what the examples that Steve was talking about. And I just want to make the connection that this course is called Energy Action Seminar. So, just encouraging you guys to think about your action and your learning as integrated. And being active and getting involved in things and making those connections with your coursework, with your active, different kinds of activities you're involved in. And obviously that's what this course is about, but that's what the students at WPI are doing to another degree. And some of you may have opportunities to study abroad or do other internships, and all of that is part of your learning. And I think just making those connections is really important. So thank you for bringing that piece too.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for saying that.
So yeah, probably a good place to stop, but is there, for those of you thinking about going abroad at some point in your course, or you haven't, do we have anything like this at UVM?
I've heard a ton just since I've been here from your guest who was here earlier talking about the waste to energy, talking about the internships and all that. I feel like there's a lot of...
I mean abroad, like going abroad, where you would do energy-related projects. We need to figure that out and tell these guys. There probably is, right? What?
I know there's several, like, one of them is in Germany, and it's like the renewable capital of the world.
Oh, the city where they don't have cars.
Yeah, and then there's another one in Montana around People City.
What?
Dan went, the TA from last year went to China. I don't think he said that program is not running anymore to study wind turbine manufacturing.
Yeah, Isabel.
There's a program in Iceland that was discontinued last year. I was going to do it.
Through the gun, right?
Yeah, and it was like saying, what a shame.
Yeah.
It just ended. But the reason it ended was because there's not that many universities in Iceland in general. They just couldn't afford the transition. So it was like a whole technology.
I'm interested in Iceland too. I want to do some studies there.
Iceland's really cool. The place to be is Iceland.
Yeah. There was one other example.
Really good.
Yeah, the Community and International Development Program here has a program in St. Lucia, Honduras, and Peru. I think I don't know how energy related it is, but it's definitely community development.
That's right. Yeah, and the one in St. Lucia. Okay, so makes us all think about this a lot more. So really appreciate Steve kind of coming in and giving us this other perspective. So thanks a lot to Steve.